Welcome to Film at 50, a podcast that celebrates semi-centennials in the world of cinema. I'm your host, Brian Rowe, and I'm so very thrilled to welcome Jordan Downey to the podcast today to talk about Willard, starring Bruce Davison, the craziest horror film of all time, right, Jordan? Willard from 1971. How are we doing, Jordan?
I'm very good. Very, very good. Thanks for having me. And I'm glad that this was an excuse to watch Willard because it was a movie that I think my dad had seen it when he was younger, probably when it first came out, right, in theaters. And he always was pointing it out on the shelves. And he was always talking about Willard or Ben, or anytime we would go to a pet store and there was a mouse or a rat or something, they were named Ben or Willard. But I didn't know at the time. I thought Willard was the name of a rat. And Ben was, so he probably had to explain the plot of this to me so many times, but for whatever reason, I was never interested in watching it as a kid.
Okay.
And so I'm glad that you have given me the final excuse
the
years
final,
later to
the
finally
final
see it.
push.
Yes.
Yeah, while watching this movie, Jordan, I was like getting nervous about an hour in. I'm like, I thought this was a horror film. Like I thought there was going to be more like, rat, mice, attack scenes, eyes being, just destroyed on screen. And this is not that kind of movie. This is a tame horror film.
It is. It's the slow burn. It's got that vibe of like the 70s horror films, but it even feels a little more dated than the time that it came out, I feel like.
Yeah, this felt to me like a 1966 film or something. 71. Yeah. I was
71.
Yeah.
Because
and it was popular too. It actually did very well.
It launched, I didn't realize that it was sort of responsible for a run on these animal horror films, especially culminating with Jaws and whatnot, but that this was kind of the first. And it shows though, right? Because they haven't found their footing in which genre they want to be yet. And it's somewhere in between because it's really only a horror film in the last 10 minutes.
Yeah. I wrote down in my notes, I was like, is this going to be Carrie? Is it just going to be at the very end we get horror? And we do, finally. I was like, oh, thank God. There is like a little bit of horror, I think. So we have something to talk about because we're both huge horror movie fans. And I did not want to disappoint you, Jordan.
No, I enjoyed it.
Yeah. So before we get into the movie, more into the movie, I wanted to talk about you a little bit. Kind of tell our listeners how we know each other. We met at Loyola Marymount University. You were a year behind me, right? So I started in 03, you started in 04. And we had a class together. It was like sect decoration or something like that. And I was a staff writer for the Loyolan and one of the film critics. And I had just seen the movie Saw, which was not out yet. Nobody really knew what it was. It had played at Sundance in January. So there was some buzz about it. But at the screening, I got this, for those of you watching, I got this Saw t-shirt, walked into the class, and you stopped what you were doing. Your eyes went huge, and you said to me, "Where did you get that t-shirt?"
Yeah.
And I knew within 10 seconds, I was like, oh, I have found a new friend.
Yeah, I don't remember. I must have been reading whatever Bloody Disgusting type horror site I was on at the time. And they would have been talking about Saw. And I think because, like you said, nobody had heard of it. No one had seen this movie. But there was that image that's on your shirt of the reverse bear trap. And I think there was a still image from it. And I had read some buzz about it or something. And I was like, this movie looks and sounds incredible. And nobody had heard of it that I was, friends with. And so then all of a sudden, within that same few day period, I see someone wearing the shirt and I'm like, whoa, like this person's somehow connected to this.
This person's connected. Did he work on the set? Who is this guy?
Right.
And at this point, I can't remember. This would have been like late August, early September. I don't know if the movie at that point was officially coming out around the country. Didn't it open Halloween weekend, I want to say?
It was coming around Halloween. So maybe there was a trailer. There may have been that trailer where basically just that showed that sequence, the bear trap sequence where the jigsaw rolls out or the puppet rolls out on the tricycle.
Yeah. So I did something really crazy in that I had already seen the film at a press screening, but I went to my A&E editor and I said, would it be possible for me to see it a second time so I could get you to go and see it. And I don't know how that happened, but we were able to go. Like, we went to the same screening room. I watched it the second time, loved it just as much the second time. And who would have thought, Jordan, it would be this massive franchise still going into 2021? Isn't that crazy?
It is. It's absolutely crazy. And I mean, but at the same time, you did know that movie was special. I mean, I was blown away, like, especially the final ending. I did not see that coming. I remember texting and telling everyone, you got to go see this when it comes out, because most friends back in Ohio were not going to have early access. And in fact, I don't know if they rolled it out on a wide release or if it kind of built up as the buzz in the box office success built. I'm not really sure, but it was not as accessible back home than it was in LA.
Okay, so it wasn't necessarily everywhere come October 31st.
Maybe not.
It took a while.
I think so.
And then after that year, what was it? Every year for a while, we got another one.
Every year, yeah. That was the tagline, right? Wasn't it? If it's Halloween, it must be Saw or something.
Yeah, exactly. And the movie that finally kind of quieted down Saw, the franchise, was Paranormal Activity, which came out in 2009. And then Paranormal Activity kind of took over the Saw reigns, right? For like 4 years or something like that. Because we got,
I think
got a final Saw, I want to say in like 2010. And then it was quiet for a while. We didn't get one for a while. And then
I think you're right.
Then we got Jigsaw came out a few years ago, like 17, maybe 18, something like that.
I think you're right. There was a gap, and then there was a semi reboot or requel, whatever you want to call it. And I kind of lost track, honestly, after about Saw 3. I kind of gave up.
Saw 3 was great. My favorite sequels were probably 2, 3, and 6. Were really good.
Okay, so you actually kind of remember. You can position them in some hierarchy.
Yeah, exactly. We were good friends at Loyola Marymount. We went to Sundance Film Festival together. You created the design of the monster of my college thesis film, Creature Story, which is one of my favorite creations, monsters of any movie I made. For all those years I was making films, like the creature in my thesis film looks fantastic, and that's all you, my friend. So
I think it was kind of Descent-like, right? Wasn't that the
I wanted something that looked like The Descent with red eyes that would be really creepy standing next to this little girl. And I don't have the talent to draw, so I basically just talked to you, kind of told you what I was thinking, and you went off. And on the day of filming, you created this amazing I remember walking outside the building, the soundstage, and you're over there with the actor, just like working on his face and like putting him in the costume, and it was really cool.
Yeah. Well, thanks for the opportunity, because it has helped a lot over the years, just getting to know special effects, makeup, and some of those different, creature, tricks that I was doing at LMU for a lot of different student films. And like you said, a lot of times people, if you're making a short film, you don't have a big budget, so you don't really know, like, how am I going to make this creature? So it kind of would come down to, like, on the day or a few days prior, what supplies did we have, and then how tall is the actor, or what's the actor look like, and are they comfortable with this prosthetic or whatnot? And it was just very experimental, I guess.
That was a weird casting session. I had like 5-6 people come in to be the creature.
Okay.
I remember an old guy was like, what are my lines? Where's my dialogue? I'm like, no, it's just, you don't have it. Your line is, I just wanted to see you physically. So I finally got somebody for that.
That shows what the life of an actor in Los Angeles is like, is that there are 6 people in line to be the creature in a student film.
Exactly. For free, right?
For free, yeah.
And then you made your thesis film a year later. Was it called Crawl Lake? Is that what's the title of that? Isn't there like a superstar actress from that movie, Jordan? Like someone who went on to, what was her name? Bella Thorne, right?
Bella Thorne. Yeah, it wasn't my thesis, but it was it was like our junior level, whatever they called it, the 300. And it was the one where you're not supposed to shoot sync sound, and you.
That's right.
And the whole thing is supposed to be done in post, all the audio. But Bella Thorne is a little girl in this short film, and she was only in a couple of commercials at the time. They were national commercials. There was like I forget what it was, IBM maybe, it was something, and she was in a commercial with a big elephant. And then she got, then she just, her career blew up, you know, in the years after. I think she was on a Disney Channel show, and then now she's, you know, in a lot bigger films. But this was an early thing of hers. Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool. The girl in my movie never did anything else.
Yeah.
I ruined her. I ruined her for life, Jordan.
Yeah.
I was like,
it's interesting.
No, okay.
Yeah.
I got her on film once, so there you go. It's kind of
go.
weird to think it's been so long. She's got, what is she now, in her 20s? That's crazy. It's been so long.
Oh, Bella, yeah, probably.
Bella and my actress Elizabeth Rovnak. She's probably in her like early to mid 20s, which is kind of crazy to think about.
Yeah.
So then
I ran into her randomly at this holiday Christmas party at this was a while ago, maybe 5 to 10 years now. But
Bella Thorne.
Yeah.
Okay.
And we caught up a little bit, but I was really surprised that she even remembered me because one, I was 19 years old in college and probably looked a little different. And also just, she was a little kid, you know, like, I don't even remember how old she would have been, 8 to 10 at that time. And most child actors show up and they kind of barely, you got to like, you know, wring their neck to get them to say their lines or not, or just pay attention. So you figure they're like, the moment they go home, that experience is just completely blocked out of their memory. And it's like, whatever. So some kids and just in general, actors love it and like stick it in their memory, and others don't.
All right, so Jordan, the time has come. We have to talk about Thankskilling, which has become like this. I mean, I remember you making it and watching it. It's so much fun, and it has become kind of this like seminal like Thanksgiving horror movie, modern, crazy classic. Like, didn't Joe Bob on Shudder just did like an episode on Thankskilling? And so, what year did you make that film? Like, when did you?
That was right after this movie we were talking about, Crawl Lake. That was in between my junior and senior year at LMU.
You made Thanksgiving while you were still at LMU. Okay. I thought it was after.
We used some gear. It was just during summer break. We basically went back to Ohio, where I'm from, and filmed it there. And then we had to go make our thesis film and finish up college. So we had all of that final year of our senior years. Basically, we were dedicated to just finishing school. So we didn't have a ton of time to be editing it. So then we kind of finished it the year after we graduated.
Okay. And so what have been in the last, so it's been like 11, 12 years. Like, what are the craziest things, Jordan, that has kind of happened with Thankskilling in the last year? With
Thankskilling? Yeah. Oh gosh. I mean, it just escalates every year, it seems like. I mean, it was on, they had this thing with Ellen had Lupita on her show like maybe a year ago. And they did this like contest where it was like, guess the craziest movies, you know, these ridiculous horror films.
For Us? She was on for Us?
Yes, she was on to promote Us. And Thankskilling popped up. And I was just like, oh my God, like they actually have Thankskilling on Ellen. If they only knew.
Nuts.
Steve Harvey, there was a thing on Family Feud where it was like a trivia. The Joe Bob thing this past year. I mean, seeing people get tattoos, pictures of graffiti that people have put on walls. Somebody gave us, when we were doing a Kickstarter for the sequel, Thankskilling 3. Somebody was like, 3, which we skipped the sequel.
You skipped the sequel.
Somebody wanted to donate to the movie, but they didn't really have the money to do it. But they were like, but we want to support you guys. What if we gave you a car to blow up? So we're like, a car to blow up? And so they gave us this old classic Studebaker, just gave it to us to destroy in Thankskilling 3, which we then ended up not having a scene to destroy a car. So we ended up with this old classic car for a little while.
Oh, funny.
Just random things over the years like that. Jake Tapper, the CNN news anchor, is a big fan of Thankskilling, so he's tweeted about it in the past.
Really? Jake Tapper of CNN has tweeted about Thankskilling.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, I think he's probably, when I say big fan, I think he probably likes to make fun of it like most people do, but in a so bad it's good kind of way.
So that's a really fun movie. And then I was blown away, Jordan, by The Headhunter, which is your film. Is that your newest film? Do you have another feature film since? Is that your newest one?
No, nothing. That's the newest.
Yeah, yep. Headhunter, which I finally got to catch up with on Shudder. It premiered on Shudder, and which I've had for a few years, which is such a great service for horror fans. I love Shudder so much. Blown away by this, Jordan. I mean, and I was
Thank
so
you.
amazed by how low of a budget it was. Wasn't it made for a very, very, very tiny budget? But it looks, I mean, I was like half an hour in, I'm like, this looks like a Game of Thrones. Like, this looks unbelievable. How did you make
Thank
it
you.
look? I mean, you have some shots that are like floating over, geographical elements and all of these gorgeous moments of like, the cinematography is just insane. So how did you make it look that so good for such a small budget?
You go travel to insane locations, I guess, and to the point where you don't need the most souped up cameras in the world to capture them, that just the location is so beautiful or looks like something out of Game of Thrones or Lord of the Rings. So we shot it in Portugal, but there are also shots in there, some of the ones you might be thinking of, that are like these drone sort of aerial shots.
Yeah, those looked unbelievable. It's like, wow.
And those, and a little trick we found with that is, like, Chris, the main actor in the movie, he had a drone, and so he had flown his drone around Norway at different seasons of the year. So we got some of his footage. We got footage from a few different people that had shot all over the world. So then it wasn't that we were in this one location. The movie is made up of, I don't know, 10 to 20 different parts of the world. Most of the actual like stuff where we're shooting on the ground is in one location, but some of those aerial shots are from all over. So it was just about finding the coolest locations and splicing them in, and keeping everything in house, building the props and doing all the special effects stuff ourselves, and just, having being smart about what not to put on camera, I guess, is what it really comes down to.
And all of that, like the effects at the end, like all the makeup, it looked very homemade. I was like, this is Jordan. Jordan is not bringing in a bunch of makeup effects artists. I think, I was like, I bet a lot of this is him and you and your team. So
it was us.
Great work on that. What's kind of come out of
Thank
that? You won some awards for it, right? Didn't it play at at a big horror festival?
Yeah, it premiered at Sitges in Spain, which is a big one, and then it went and played at a bunch of different festivals, and it won a bunch of different awards. It won Best Feature at a couple of different festivals, or some of the stuff I'm probably most proud of, that it won Best Actor for Chris at Fantas Porto in Portugal. But that festival has a very good track record of sort of like Mads Mikkelsen, Harvey Keitel, a bunch of different big actors have won that Best Actor award at their festival prior to, really taking off. So that's the one that was the most exciting, just because of the history of what that meant. But it did very well. Yeah, we were really happy with how it turned out.
It must have been fun for you to be able to travel around the world like that. And I mean, not only for the film shoot itself, but then to travel around a little bit for the festivals. Must have been a blast.
Yeah, it was really, I didn't go to all of them, but to go to the ones that we could, it was a lot of fun. At the same time too, you're like nervous and stressed out, right? Because you're like, you got to get up and give a speech, or you're worried about just like it gets in your head, this like, what this means, or how you're supposed to maximize the success of something like that. And so I wish next time I'm just gonna not care about that and just sit back and enjoy it.
It's hard. Sometimes it's hard to enjoy, because you're like, okay, I should be doing something here. I should be meeting more people. I should be at parties. Like you can't really just enjoy the moment of your film that has been completed. Yeah, I get that.
Exactly.
So yeah, I just wanted to touch on some of your films, Jordan, and I'm just so excited for you, so thrilled with your career right now, and excited to see where it goes from here. But yeah, taking us back to just film in general and horror films, what are some of your favorite films? I'm assuming your favorites are all horror films, or do you have a couple that are not horror related? Okay, so if you just want to talk about some of your favorite films, what kind of got you into, this profession and your love of cinema?
I mean, it's weird because I love horror films, but to be honest, like when I think of what are my favorite movies, they're usually not necessarily all horror films.
Oh,
so
cool.
Like, Critters is my favorite movie. And so and which is totally silly that somebody would say that. But
so are you first in line, Jordan? If they ever do, if Blumhouse ever does a Critters remake, are you first in line to direct it?
I would love to be. Yeah, I mean, I would certainly love to be to do a proper Critters reboot.
If David Gordon Green steps aside, because I just read he's doing the new Exorcist movie right after the new Halloween trilogy.
Mm-hmm.
Jordan Downey, everybody. Blumhouse, Jason. Hire Jordan to do the Critters remake.
I don't even know what the Blumhouse version of Critters. That would be pretty. Actually, they'd probably nail it because they did upgrade, and that has the sci-fi sort of elements that Critters has. So it would probably be incredible, actually.
Wasn't there something new with Critters in the last 5 years? Was it a short film or something?
They did two new sort of versions of it.
Okay.
There was like a web series, and then there was this there was a straight to sci-fi channel sequel.
Okay.
And they're not really like, they're not really exactly what you would have expected from the little snippets and trailers I've seen and whatnot, but nothing much. But that was the movie that like I kind of watched on repeat that just started to make me think about what happens behind a movie, you know, and going on IMDb and like looking up trivia or looking for props on Google Images or just learning about a writer or a director and crew members. That was the first movie that started to take it beyond just I'm watching a movie on TV, but there's something more going on.
Okay, gotcha.
But other favorite movies that would immediately come to mind that I just watch on repeat, it would bounce back and forth. Like RoboCop is definitely up there.
Good one.
The Straight Story, the David Lynch drama.
You like the Straight Story? Oh, cool.
I love it.
I just taught a film class 2 years ago. I did a David Lynch class, and the only film of his I had never seen was The Straight Story. And so I watched it. I really loved it, and it's such a kind of a warm, kind of intimate drama. Does not feel like Lynch, but it's still. You can kind of tell like kind of why he was drawn to it. Such a strong performance by Richard Farnsworth, who got an Oscar nomination. It's a lovely film. I love The Straight Story.
It was fantastic. And I think I saw that movie at a time when I was mostly consuming horror, sci-fi, action, you know, those kinds of things. And then this was one of the first sort of, I guess, dramas that I saw, and that I was like, whoa, I actually have an even stronger reaction to this than the genre stuff I was watching. Terminator 2 is an absolute favorite.
Yeah, they keep trying to replicate T2 with all these sequels and reboots of Terminator. It'll never be T2.
never. So all kinds of stuff. I mean, and then horror, I would say, Texas Chainsaw Massacre is definitely a favorite.
Speaking of the 70s, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, one of the most important influential horror films of the 1970s.
Exactly. And another favorite that is a more recent favorite, because I had only seen this for the first time a few years ago, but Black Christmas, the 70s original.
Also, same year, 74. Yeah.
Yep.
Which, a lot of people think of Halloween, the 78 John Carpenter Halloween, as being the first one where you see like the POV of the killer. But Black Christmas does it first. You see it in Black Christmas. And then way earlier in a film called Peeping Tom from 1960, the same year as Psycho. Peeping Tom also has a POV of the killer. Halloween, which is my favorite horror film, the 78 Halloween. It's not the first one to have done that. Black Christmas does it also with to a great effect. I love Black
Correct.
Christmas. None of the remakes, but the original Black Christmas from 74 is a really, really strong film. You should check it out.
Really, it's fantastic. It blew me away. I was like, this is terrifying. I mean, there is stuff in there. Some of the shots, like I used to be obsessed with the X-Files, and I called them the X-Files shot, because at the time I didn't see anything else that did it, where the camera would drift away from the characters and kind of just roam down a hallway or move over into a closet to show you something that was lurking in the house that the heroes didn't see. And Black Christmas has a few of those moments that are so scary. That's the stuff that disturbs me for some reason. No, like the characters being unaware of this other thing that's happening over there gets me every time.
Yeah, there's something about horror films of the 70s. There's like this tangible quality. There's this creepiness to 70s horror that hasn't really been replicated in other decades, or something about it. Just like the look of the film, everything is really there on the screen. Once you get to the 80s, which is another great decade of horror that I love, there's a lot more craziness. But the 70s horror films are usually quieter, not a whole lot of blood, and they really stand the test of time, I think, all the horror films of the 70s.
They do. Yeah, absolutely. And that's kind of what, I mean, especially Chainsaw Massacre is just like I don't think a movie will ever capture the tone and the just like griminess, the ickiness of that movie. I don't know if anyone can ever recapture that. I mean, we studied it so much for The Headhunter of just like, what is it that all of the, like, just the little things, just like, having these specialized zoom shots that are just like, you can tell it's the camera operator that's just twisting the lens, and there's not an automated dial where it's perfect, and just those 70s kind of like camera movements. And just that you could tell like, they were running out of film, and this was the only take that they had, and it goes in there in the movie. And yeah, I love that. I love that.
Texas Chainsaw, one of my favorites ever horror films. When I watch it occasionally, I'm always reminded, like, it feels like a documentary. It feels like you're really watching this happen in real time. Like, it doesn't feel like a movie, and you don't get that very often in horror films. And it definitely, it comes through in Texas Chainsaw, the first one.
Absolutely. And it has like, in this, I mean, we'll get into this with Willard, but it has so many iconic shots or moments, whereas something like Willard, there's not that much that stands out. But Chainsaw Massacre, I mean, you can, the flashbulb stuff in the beginning, the opening shot of the giant corpse, like with that sun behind him, him Leatherface dancing in the road at the, there's like, you could point out shot. Like so many things that are just burned into memory. And ultimately that's kind of like what makes something a classic, I feel like. Are there a couple of those shots that become merchandise, that basically everyone tries to emulate in every sequel, that like, you can't make a reboot of Chainsaw Massacre without this or whatever. And a lot of films don't necessarily have that.
Yeah, absolutely. And something we've talked about on the podcast before, I've done a couple horror themed episodes. The early 70s, like 70, 71, 72, not a great time for horror films. There's kind of like this weird period where I think filmmakers are still trying to find their voice. Now, after 68, we have the MPAA, so filmmakers can make bloody, R-rated, horror films, but it's not until The Exorcist in 73, I want to say, where really horror comes back kind of in full force at the box office. 1970, I mean, the film we looked at was House of Dark Shadows, which felt very much of like a 60s film. And then, I mean, 72, we get Wes Craven's first movie, Last House on the Left. Remember when we met? Wes Craven, Jordan?
Well, yeah, you were the intern.
I interned for his company for 4 months in spring of 2007. He came into the office one time, and it was such an amazing morning. I was like, I heard the door, the chime go off, and I look up, and there he is. I was like, oh my God. So I got to see him, and I got to say hi to him, shake his hand when he came in. And then the only other time I saw him that semester was we went to the premiere of The Hills Have Eyes 2. And I remember we went up to him at the end, and we shook his hand again, and I remember you said to him, and just very excitedly, you said, congratulations for The Hills Have Eyes 2.
Congratulations. Yeah.
I think we both turned to each other at the end of that, and we were like, well, that wasn't very good, but we'll act like it was great.
Yeah. That's funny. Yeah. And I mean, and I ended up taking over your spot as that same intern in the.
You interned there too?
Yeah. I thought you knew that.
How did I not know that?
I don't know. Maybe it was it was
summer or that fall.
The next.
Was it the
maybe
fall?
Maybe it was longer I thought it was the next semester.
Okay.
Or whatever, right after that. But yeah, I did the same thing then, and had the same experience where he came in one time and we chatted a little bit, and just that same moment of like, here's your 60 seconds with Wes Craven. What do you say? And
Yeah, he came in one day. Well, part of it was I only worked there 2 mornings a week, right? So he's not, I mean, if I was there 5 mornings a week, maybe I would have seen him more. I was there for what, like 4 hours? I don't think I was there very long.
Yeah.
But the one day he came in, it was to interview a director of The Last House on the Left remake, which would come out in 2009. So in early 2007, they were already starting that process of interviewing directors at his company.
This is a funny little, not to go down to too much of a tangent, but because you brought up Last House. So I think then we must have gone back to back, because when I came in, they had already hired the director. They were maybe doing rewrites, but they were basically gearing up to pitch it or to get the financing.
Okay, so
but I remember
shot, like, was it, I wonder if it was shot in late 2007 or in 2008, because the film came out in early 2009.
Probably, I'm guessing fall of 2007 then, maybe. So there was a call that came in, and you answer Midnight Entertainment, and he was like, "Hey, it's Wes," and I was like, and
oh, hi, Wes.
He was asking for Marianne, who was his producing partner, and who was kind of more like our direct boss, I suppose. But he basically was like calling to say that he was calling the office to tell them that he had just received the go-ahead, the green light to go and produce Last House. So I was kind of one of the first people in the office that heard that news from him. Cool. And that was really cool too. I guess I probably said, "Congrats again."
Congratulations.
Yeah, that's all I can say.
Boy, we've lost a lot of actors and filmmakers over the years, Jordan, but the loss of Wes Craven in 2015, that hit me really hard. That was tough. I wanted him. He was only 76. I thought he had another 10 years, maybe some more films in him. I'm glad we got one more Scream. I really enjoy Scream 4. But I kind of feel like, he had a few more in him. I would have liked to have seen him do one more decade of some cool horror film.
That one was tough. Yeah.
Wes Craven, obviously a significant figure in horror cinema, who also got a start in the early 70s. Someone who did not get a start in the early 70s, going back to Willard, is the director Daniel Mann. This was one of his later films. This is a guy directing Burt Lancaster in movies in the 1950s.
Yeah.
Did not really do horror, thriller, suspense, and as we'll get into here, I think you can kind of see it on the screen. Before we talk about what we thought of Willard, our film today, I wanted to give our listeners just a brief summary of what the movie's about for those of you who might not know what this film is about. So Bruce Davison, a young Bruce Davison who's still acting today, would later get an Oscar nomination. He's had a really great career. He's in the X-Men films. This is one of his early movies. He plays the title character Willard, a 27-year-old social misfit who struggles to relate to other people, like his ailing mother, Henrietta, played by Elsa Lanchester, his overbearing boss, Mr. Martin, played by the great Ernest Borgnine, who won an Oscar, of course, for Marty in the 50s, and the pretty office temp, Joan, played by Sandra Locke, who did a lot of films with Clint Eastwood. The only friends he is able to make are the rats that he raises at his home. The two main ones, right, are Ben and Socrates, along with many, many others. As the movie goes on, they keep multiplying the rats. After his mother dies suddenly, and after his boss kills one of his rat friends at work, Willard's mental state quickly devolves into madness, and he bands together with the rats to enact revenge. Is that kind of the main idea of the movie? Am I leaving anything?
Except that describes about 3/4 of the movie, and then the first 3/4 of the movie, and then the last. You know what I mean? It makes it seem like you're going to get to the revenge aspects about a third of the way through.
Yeah, I don't. Right up front here, I don't want our listeners to think that this is a movie where something bad happens in minute 25, and then the next hour plus is him enacting revenge. That's really not what this movie is. So I don't know about you, Jordan. I had been aware of this movie before. I didn't see the remake with Crispin Glover, but it came out when I was a senior in high school. I was aware of it. And then, of course, I learned that there was an older version from the 70s. If you look up the plot summaries online, and I thought I was expecting a different kind of movie than we get here. I thought this was going to be a little bit more of a gruesome horror film, people getting attacked by rats, we don't really get that here. And that's not to
No.
say that it's a bad film. I actually really had fun with this. I enjoyed it. Once I kind of settled in and was like, okay, this is not what I expected, but that's okay. Sometimes movies, that happens with movies. You think you're going to get something and then you get something else. That doesn't make it a bad film. It's just something that you didn't expect,
Yeah, exactly. And maybe, on the flip side, audiences, when this came out, maybe a big reason why it did so well is because they weren't expecting any horror. So getting a little bit of that at the end, was kind of shocking. Because I kind of, like you said, the director, it's interesting because I'd never really thought about this that much, but that the director's timeline of making movies, he had been working for for many years before making Willard, right?
Yeah.
Whereas somebody like Wes Craven, you mentioned Tobe Hooper, their first films are these brutal things, and that's right out of the gate. They don't have 20 years of, I guess, like just film making knowledge seared into how they make movies.
Yeah, exactly.
And this feels like a movie that is more dated than its time period would suggest, because I think he was more. Before that, I mean, you're talking like what, Old Yeller or Lassie are kind of the like animal,
yeah,
and it has kind of that wholesome nature to it, right? Did you pick up on that?
There's a very wholesome nature to this movie. I made two notes about the score. The score to this movie is very whimsical. Like you're watching a G-rated Disney movie. I mean, even when like the rat gets killed like an hour in or whatever it is, like the score is still whimsical. I'm like, like seriously? So yeah, this is a filmmaker brought up on the 50s style of filmmaking, making films with big stars and dramatic films, romance films. If you look back on his career of the 50s and 60s, this director was not making horror films. So this is kind of like a little bit outside the norm of what he would do. And he probably saw this as a character study more than a scary movie. I don't think, as I said before, there weren't a whole lot of scary films coming out around this time. In 1968, you had Rosemary's Baby and Night of the Living Dead, right? Those are two landmark horror films of 68. But even Rosemary's Baby, if you watch that film, it's a very slow character study. It's
very
not
slow.
A film that's necessarily like shocking you and scaring you very much. It's more of like a character study. And then you go 69, 70, 71, there's not a whole lot of horror films. So yeah, this is kind of an unusual time for the genre. And the fact that Willard made so much money, I think tells you that, people were at a different place here than they would be a few years later with films like The Exorcist and Texas Chainsaw.
Yeah, absolutely. And it does feel like it's in this transition period between eras almost. Like you said, there's that 50s sensibility. And I made the same note. I was like, why is this is kind of like this, very classical, almost Peter and the Wolf or Disney-like sort of score at times, especially when you first introduce the rats. It's very cheery. And when it first happened, I was like, okay, this might be really interesting if they flip this as the movie goes, in this like that your expectations of this like boy and his pet sort of film thing gets turned on its head. They kind of do that. I mean, the ending's pretty dark, but it just takes a long time,
which we will get into, by the way. I've decided finally on this podcast to take it like on a case-by-case basis. Sometimes I'm like, we can't talk about the ending because I want our listeners to go find this film. But Willard, I feel like especially since there's so little horror in this movie until the last 20 minutes, like we kind of have to talk about what happens in that last scene. So when we get to that, we'll flash the spoiler alert when we get to that final scene. But before we get to more on the movie, I wanted to kind of give some trivia, kind of a little bit about the director and the screenwriter of this movie. So the film was written by Gilbert Ralston, based on the novel Ratman's Notebooks. Ralston also wrote the screenplay to the sequel, 1972, Jordan. Right after this, we had a sequel called Ben, which is about a lonely boy who befriends Ben. I'd be really curious to look at the sequel. I don't know if I'll do a podcast episode about it, in 2022, but I'll definitely watch it at some point. The sequel, Jordan, was nominated for an Academy Award for Best Original Song.
Oh, Michael Jackson did it, right?
I don't know. I didn't look up who actually. It's like
Michael Jackson.
I was like, Michael sequel to Willard got an Oscar nomination.
It's Michael Jackson.
It won the Golden Globe for Best Original Song.
Wow. And it was, I think, because I did this same little deep dive, I think it was Michael Jackson when he was with the Jackson 5. It was not solo Michael Jackson.
Yeah, no,
he was pretty young still.
Jackson doesn't go solo until the late 70s, I want to say. Isn't his first album like 79? Like it's like later in the decade.
I don't know.
Yeah, I think
right,
it's 72. He's not solo yet. So it was only him, or was it the whole group?
No, I think it was only him, but he was 14, 15. And it was maybe Donny Osmond or something. There was someone else that they offered it to, and he said no. And then Michael Jackson was like, Rat sequel? Sign me up.
Jackson should have done that his whole career. Like, instead of doing Free Willy, like, he should have done more horror films. He should have done Critters 2, the main course, Jordan.
Yeah, Mike, he should have done.
And the nominees, and the Oscar nominees for Best Original Song, Critters 2, the main course.
That's so good.
That's the one thing about song, right? Like, the quality of the movie doesn't matter, really. If the song,
guess not.
If everybody loves the song, I don't know.
You got to end the podcast with the song. That's got to be the sign.
Oh, I know. If I had the rights, I've heard like you can play up to 4 seconds, and then you're in trouble. That's what I heard.
That might be all that's good. Who knows?
So then the director, Daniel Mann, he directed some. He started in the early 50s, made films with Burt Lancaster, among others. He also directed Our Man Flint with James Coburn, which is kind of famous. He also did. The director didn't do the sequel, which is called In Like Flint, but he did the first one with Coburn. He also directed Butterfield 8 from 1960, which won Elizabeth Taylor her first of her 2 Academy Awards. So, he's not making like the classiest movies of all time. I've actually seen Butterfield 8, and it's a pretty trashy movie. It's really fun.
Yeah.
So it's not like he's making like these grand dramatic epics and then Willard.
All right.
But he's definitely does not have a whole lot of horror on the resume.
No.
When we get to Willard. We'll talk about him and kind of like what does he bring to this movie. This film was the first theatrical production from Bing Crosby Productions. Did you see that?
Yeah, I saw that. Yeah.
So I looked that up. I'm like, why would Bing Crosby, of all people, be affiliated with this movie? And it said by 1971, Bing Crosby himself was no longer associated with the company.
That's funny.
So it's like he started this company for other things, and then like they used that name for this movie, and he's not a part. It's very strange.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know what the thinking was. I guess that's just where the funding came from or something. I don't know.
Who knows?
Maybe Bing got a little bit of money from the profits. I don't know. He probably collected some checks. He was like, probably. What is this film my name's on? It's about rats. Yeah. Which, for so many years, until I watched this movie, Jordan, I thought Willard, I think you might have said, like, I thought Willard was the name of the rat.
Me too. Yeah. For when I was a kid, that's what I was saying. I thought Willard was the name of the rat.
Which would
because
make
it seems like an animal name, not a human name.
Yeah, it kind of makes sense. And it's like, why name the movie after just the main character? Why not? I mean, it's about kind of how the rats come involved in this. Like, I feel like it should be the name of the rat. It should be Ben should be the guy, and Willard should be the rat. But they went a different way.
Right.
So Bruce Davison, who plays Willard, had a rat placed on his shoulder as part of his audition, so that worked well for him. Okay. Ernest Borgnine had to overcome his fear of rats prior to filming.
What is that process like?
What's that week entail? Like,
yeah.
Oh my god! I have to be near rats. What does he do? Was he go to like Death Valley for a week and go to like a rehab center? Like, what does he do?
Right. Yeah, I don't even know. What you'd have to put a rat in a cage and sleep next to it in bed, and every morning you get a little closer to it, or I don't even know what.
Have you ever had a fear of rats? I mean, I'm afraid of like snakes and spiders, like most people. Like mice and rats, I'm not like. I mean, I haven't seen very many in my lifetime, but I'm not like, oh my god, run.
No, every movie that will, like, how many times a rat has been the subject of appearing in someone's flashlight as they're going through a sewer, and then it makes them slip or fall in movies, and I'm always like, it's not really that gross. Like, it's the difference between a rat in the sewer and a rat at PetSmart, or a mouse at PetSmart, or a guinea pig. it's not that big of a difference. So I don't get like where all the fear comes from.
I mean, I guess like a giant rat, like that was 8 feet tall, that would be scary. But like a little rat, I'm not,
Sure.
I mean, it's not ideal, but I'm not going to scream and run into the other room or anything.
Right.
Manly men. But then if I see like a yellow jacket, I'm in the next town, Jordan.
Oh, well, yeah. Well,
I'm booking it. I'm out of there. All right, a couple more things. Bruce Davison and Sandra Locke were dating in real life at the time the movie was made in 1970. They never appeared as a couple in public because Locke at the time was married.
Interesting.
That's kind of interesting. Bruce
and Locke
Davison
is the girl.
Yeah, Locke is the main girl.
She's the other intern or the temp.
Yeah. So this is just coming from IMDb. I don't know. Maybe someone made it up. But if that's true, that's kind of an interesting little backstory about this movie. Roger Ebert and Gene Siskel both gave the film 2 stars out of 4. Siskel said, while the movie will have you keeping your feet up off the theater floor, Daniel Mann's slow direction will lower your eyelids. I thought that was a good quote from Gene Siskel.
That's great. Okay.
And then I read Roger Ebert's review. I'm a huge Roger Ebert fan, and his review is very strange. He doesn't really criticize the movie. He just like tells you what it's about, and that's the review. And kind of like, in a way that makes it sound like kind of a piece of junk, like the way he describes it. He got, like a new paragraph will say, and then this happens, and then that happens, and then how fun. It just kind of ends. You're like, okay, it's a very weird review.
Huh.
So
maybe he just must not have felt much. And it's like, I'll just rehash the plot because I don't really feel anything else.
Yeah. And this is, it's obviously early in their careers as film critics. They didn't start their show. The first version of their show started in 1975. So they weren't working together yet in 1971. Okay. Ben the Rat won a Patsy Award as the best animal performer in a feature film for 1971. Wow. Good on you, Ben. Did Ben get a little trophy?
Ben the Rat. Yeah. Well, and first of all, is Ben the Rat played by one rat, or is it like another animal movie where there's 4 different rats that played Ben?
That's a good. I didn't
probably
see.
Not.
I would assume it's more than one, right? They're not using one rat.
No, there's different. There's the close-up rat, and there's the rat that can run, and the rat that can jump, and
yeah, there's usually like 8 or 10 when they use like when there's like a really central animal figure in a movie. Usually they have a bunch of them. And then the last little piece of trivia, as we mentioned briefly before, this was a surprise box office success, the 12th highest grossing film of 1971. Wow. It led to a slew of animal horror films in the early 70s, including 1972's Stanley, which is about killer rattlesnakes, and 1976's Kiss of the Tarantula, about killer tarantula, which are 2 films I have not heard of. And then, of course, it also led to a sequel, Ben, from 1972. Yeah, so it's funny when I say it's the 12th highest grossing film of 1971. You know how much money it actually made? Like $9 million.
$9 million at the box office.
Yeah, $9 million is a lot in 71 for a small movie like this. We talked recently on the podcast about Love Story, which was the biggest hit of 1970. That made like $100 million in 1970-71, which is crazy. Like you think of, I don't really know how, like in terms of the inflation and like what would 9 million in 71 be today? It'd still be a pretty good chunk of dough, I think, in 2021.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah. So I mean, it did well for a movie like this.
Expect it. Right.
Oh yeah.
Right.
And it's really, I don't know exactly like the day it came out on some websites say July 71. Some say its world premiere was June 71. IMDb says it had its first screening in February of 71. That's why this episode is dropping in February, because it did have a screening of some kind in February. So I don't know exactly, like maybe it was one of those that was just kind of like trickling across the country for a few months and it didn't go wide until the summer, but it was having screenings as early as February of 71.
Interesting. And I wonder then if it picked up a good TV run then after that. Because there wasn't like video stores weren't really prominent yet. So I wonder then
not yet.
It probably got, because that's when I first would have seen it, is just the cover of the big rat face and says Ben. And then I probably found Willard from that. But
yeah,
so it probably got yet another shelf life at video stores 10 years later.
Yeah, there were pros and cons back then, right? The big con is if you went to a movie in 71 and you loved it and it left the theater, there was no way to watch it. If it didn't air on TV or come back as a re-release, when did home video come in? Maybe the very end of the 70s and early 80s?
I think it was around then, but pretty unaffordable for most people. Yeah.
It took a while for like affordable VHS, like video stores having copies of the movies. I want to say that was at least 83, 84. I mean, until that really started happening. So
I think,
I mean, in the 70s, you were kind of out of luck. If it left theater, that was it. You know, which is really weird to think about. Like
it is
now. I mean, I've said this once in the podcast about when I was a kid, I would dream about a future where you could think of any movie in your head and you could turn on the TV and play it. And we're kind of there, right? I mean, you might have to pay $3 on Amazon, and even like the really obscure titles that are hard to find, you can find them if you do, if you search for them the right way. So we are kind of at this time period where any film in history you want to watch, you can find it within a few minutes, which is kind of insane.
Absolutely.
Like that future I imagined at 9-10 years old, it's here.
Pretty much. Yeah,
you know?
Absolutely.
But in the 70s, you were out of luck.
Well, and if Willard made that kind of money, I guess that goes to show that the word of mouth would have been pretty good, because I mean, the title Willard doesn't necessarily imply anything. You know, it's not heist or speed or something that sounds thrilling. It's Willard. What does that mean? Just as far as on a marquee, what does that mean? So people must have been recommending it and enjoying it at the time. You know, to tell their friends to go see it.
It's not huge names. It's not Keanu Reeves. It's Bruce Davison.
Right.
It's not Sandra Bullock, Jordan. It's Sandra Locke.
Sandra Locke. Yeah. Yeah.
So, I mean, maybe the only like Sandra I know of. Like some people call Sandra Bullock, even though she prefers Sandra. Like Sandra Locke spells it with an O, so it's Sandra Locke.
Sandra Locke,
who I thought was really great in this, considering how little she had to do. Like in terms of her character is not extremely well written in the screenplay, but she does kind of what she can with this.
I liked her, yeah.
So that takes us into the movie. So we talked about a little bit up at the top, but like, what else did we think about this movie, Jordan? What did we like about 1971's Willard?
I mean, I liked the setup of everything. I liked that he's in this, that he works this sort of deadbeat clerical job inside of this kind of tough guy steel mill. Like something out of Deer Hunter, but he's not Robert De Niro down there getting his hands dirty. He's the guy up in the office crunching the numbers. I liked that setup of everything, and I liked where it was going. It just took too long to come together. But there are some things that stand out to me. Like I thought that the general premise of him being in this house alone and keeping the rats down in the basement kind of reminded me of Reanimator a little bit, with just sort of like keeping a secret down in the basement. I like that. And I thought that it was really well executed, just the death of Socrates, the rat later on.
Yeah, that's really
other
disturbing.
Than the score, it's shocking. Yeah, and they show it with the blood. I mean,
they show it getting hit, and it's like bloody, and it's like it's not quite dead yet. And up until that point, there's been very little in the way of, you know, almost nothing, right, of gore or horror or terror or anything. So that and you keep cutting to Bruce Davison's face, and he's just kind of squinting and just really in pain watching this happen. And that's probably the most effective, like you know, kind of moment of terror in the movie is the murder of Socrates the mouse.
I think so, yeah. And it feels, I mean, there's some of the shots that it feels like Ernest Borgnine's stick or his cane is like getting close to a real mouse, and you just, if you like animals, you just feel like, man, they actually kind of pushed this a little bit more than you could get away with now.
Yeah. I feel like this director, I would have expected him to just keep the death of the mouse off screen and just have it maybe be on Ernest Borgnine's face as he just slams it down. And then you would just see Davison just kind of like, and then everybody walks out. The fact that he showed the mouse at all getting all bloodied up, I was actually surprised by this point in the movie.
Yeah. Yeah. Same here. And I thought that was handled well, because you did not tease any kind of violence whatsoever really prior to this. The rat shenanigans were that they went and messed up their party and they ate cake and stuff. So there wasn't anything that was at all violent. So this kind of came at a shock. And then it also is sort of a tonal turning point, I guess, at that point in time in the movie.
Yeah,
I thought that was
when
handled well.
That's when it really turns. I want to say like the catalyst, like to start the devolution into madness for him, like when he starts getting a little bit, out of sync with everything, and that's the death of his mother. Like, even though it's off screen, speaking of not seeing death, I mean, we don't even see her die. It's just off screen. But after that, and now he's alone in the house, and there's people who want to like bulldoze the house down, including his boss, right? He comes to the house. He's like, I'm going to bulldoze this down. We can build 40 apartments here, he says.
Right.
And so that's really the start. And then it's when they kill Socrates. That's when he's just like, okay. Then as the viewer, you're like, okay, something's got to happen here, especially to the boss. Like there's no way this ends with the boss just taking a walk, whistling down the street, and all is well.
No,
this guy's gonna get it, right? Come on, Daniel, man, show it. Let's have it.
Yeah, absolutely. And they did a good job of teasing out Ben and his arc of a character.
He's got an arc.
He's got an arc, and I love like there's that great moment where he's like sniffing and looking at the box of poison as if he can read poison, and he starts squealing to his friends. I was like, okay, it's weird because
mouse talk.
Mouse talk, yeah, but like they pretty smoothly, I'll give him credit, to like transition to fantasy like that, because he's teaching them tricks early on, and they kind of there's a big passage of time. You kind of think that this movie goes through months. And there's a lot of off-screen stuff that he's teaching them language and teaching them different skills and stuff. But I thought that it was pretty cool that by the end of it, we got there, and it didn't feel completely out of left field that this transition had happened.
Yeah. Something else I loved about the movie, and I knew this would be a thing, it's real rats. It's real mice. You're seeing real. I mean, were there puppets in this, Jordan? I didn't notice any puppets.
No.
Like, you see these shots of, I mean, maybe like when it's real close up and it's doing something, maybe there was a little bit of that. But for the most part, you're looking at real mice, real rats, the whole movie. And that, I think, I haven't seen the remake from 2003. I don't know how much of that is real mice and fake or whatever. But I feel like if this were made now, it would be a lot of CGI rats, which would look
the remake
terrible. Is this remake a lot of CG?
The trailer at least shows a lot of CG stuff.
You're right. We did an episode on the Patreon about The Witches, the new remake of The Witches by Robert Zemeckis. And one of the great things about the 1990 version with Angelica Houston is that it's some real mice and then it's some puppets, but it looks great. You can see it's tangible on the screen. In the 2020 remake, it's all CGI, and it just takes you out. Like, you don't buy it. It just looks fake, Yep. And so watching the 1971 Willard, it's just something about seeing real rodents on the screen. It makes the movie better. Like, it really gives it a flavor that you can't have in a remake that would be made now. It'd be all CG. So I like that about it too. Some of the shots where you see like 50, 60, 70 of the mice, like that's kind of scary. You're like, oh my God, that would freak me out. If I was walking down the hallway and 70 mice came at me. I was actually surprised that Mr. Martin, when he's actually finally, surrounded by mice in his final scene, he's actually not that afraid. He's just kind of like, oh. He'd be screaming. He'd be like, oh my God. I thought he would be a little bit more animated in that scene. But he's like, sit down. And he's like, okay. It's like, what?
It is interesting.
Wouldn't he run?
Right.
What does Willard have on him? Sit down. And his boss is like, okay, I'll sit. It's like, what?
Right. Right.
I guess it needs to happen for the plot, but
yeah, exactly. It's all the Willard, Willard's confidence growing kind of arc. I would say one thing I really like too that they didn't develop as far as I think they should have is the cat. I loved the introduction of the cat. I was like, that's great. That's the nemesis to Willard's best friend.
Right. Yeah, they don't really do much with it.
Don't do anything with it. I was like, oh, this is going to be great when the cat comes home and we see what is, what shenanigans are going to come out of this, or are they going to, and I think the remake does do this because the trailer shows the rats messing with a cat, or the cat falling into a sea of rats. So they thought the same thing. They were like, oh, we got to do something with the cat.
That was weird. It's like, okay, we introduced this cat, Sandra Locke, what's her name, Joan. She gives Willard this cat, and he's like, oh yeah, I'll take care of it. And then the cat kind of like nibbles at his briefcase, where like one of the is it just one of the is it just Ben in there?
I don't remember.
Is it more than one? But then he just gives the cat to this random guy in a phone booth. and then her last scene in the movie at the end, she's like, oh, where's the cat? And he's like, oh, the cat is outside hunting.
Right.
Like, oh yeah, as a cat would. And then that's it. Right. It's like, why even bring the cat in if the cat is not going to interact with Ben and the other mice? Like, it would make sense that would be a thing, that like the first like gruesome death in the movie would be the cat or something.
Be the cat. That's exactly. It's perfect. I was like, man, this is great. And then they missed it.
Yeah, I mean, as I said at the top, it's not the movie I expected. I still think there could have been a little bit more horror in the film. I feel like really two people get it in this movie, right? Which we'll get to. Yeah. I swear, I'll give the spoiler. But I felt like, that what was the relationship with that kind of crazy woman who like worked for or helped with the mom, who's like, she just had a great kind of strange face, like look on film. And I thought she was going to be the first victim, because remember, she comes over, she's like, you got to sell the house. And he like pushes her out. He's like, stop coming here. I don't need your help. Get out. And she's kind of like running away in a huff. I was like, oh, she's going to be our first victim. She'll be the first one in the first half of the film. And then she just like disappears. She never comes back. That was another case. Like the cat, I felt like that could have been a character. We could have had an early scene of Ben like doing something, messing up this woman who's, very, effectively annoying character in the first half.
It's almost like Willard got made, and then other filmmakers and writers watched it, and they were like, huh, they should have done this, this, and this, because so many of these things we're talking about then became horror tropes that like, oh, you introduce sort of this BC character that kind of has a reason to come to the house, but then they show up alone, and now they're going to get killed in the backyard, but whatever happens. And then there's an animal that gets killed first or whatever. But Willard has they plant these seeds, and then they don't do anything with it. Like that characters really threw me for a loop, because I was like, okay, this group, this is something I loved. I thought it was great that they introduced Willard when he comes home for his birthday party. They put a ridiculous hat on him, and his only friends are all basically over the age of 65, 70 years old.
They're all over 60. Yeah.
I was like, okay, that's really cool. I kind of wanted them to go further with that. Willard's only friends are his mom's older friends.
Yeah.
But there's this weird subplot thing going on that they don't really ever pay off. That like, are all of the friends in on getting Willard out of there and killing? Did they poison the mom? Or did she die natural?
Yeah, do we learn what she died of? She's just kind of getting sicker. Like, did she have cancer? Like, what did she have?
Nothing.
Like, it's not very clear. So yeah, there is like, I was like, are they trying to get the house? Like, is someone else kind of making her sick? That could have been an interesting part of the plot that we never see.
Well, okay, and this is what made me think is that crazy aunt type friend character that you're talking about. She bakes some kind of she makes custard or something, right? Yeah. When Willard comes over. And she wants to bring the custard up to give to the mom, and I could leave it in the fridge. And then there's that poison at the end. My mind started going, oh, was she trying to kill the mom with I don't know if it's with the rat poison or just with whatever she did, but it seemed too convenient that she wanted Willard gone while she visited the mom and all that, and then the mom dies in her arms. Yeah. The next day.
I wonder, Jordan, if we're reading too much into this movie through a 2021 lens of like all the horror stories we've told as filmmakers and that we've seen, that maybe they weren't even really thinking about this at the screenplay level, at the filmmaker level in 1970 when they made this. Maybe they were just like, telling this, this character study, this guy, and then we're gonna have a little bit of violence at the end with these mice.
Right.
You mentioned that birthday scene. Such a great way to establish kind of how terrible his like social life is. When he comes in, this is like the first thing he hears from his mother, by the way, who for me looked kind of like his grandmother. she's supposed to be his mom in this movie. I mean, maybe it's just a matter of this being 50 years ago. But she looked a little old to be his mom. I mean, he is playing a 27-year-old here. I think he was like even younger than that when he played the role. And Lanchester is, I think, maybe a little bit too old to be his mom. But she says to him, 27 years ago tonight, you were born in pain and suffering. The doctors didn't think, she says, the doctors didn't think I would live. That's like what he's met with. I mean, imagine walking into your birthday party and you hear that. And then this aunt or whoever she is, she says right after that, you know, Willard is an extrovert, but he keeps it all inside.
Right.
Those are two lines I wrote down. I thought were really funny.
Yeah, I know. I thought that whole scene was really funny. I mean, it was effective in terms of in a very efficient way, I suppose. You getting Willard set up and everything that you want to know about that character and who his friend and that he has no friends and what they feel about him and that he's going to be the, you know, zero to hero kind of arc. But yeah, it was very strange. Those lines caught me off guard too, of like, born out of pain and suffering. I was like, that's
you know,
weird.
A typical mother would say 27 years ago tonight, you were born. My mom has said that. She's like, you know, 32 years ago or 35, like what she'll be like, it was today. She doesn't say you were born out of pain and suffering.
No. And the mom's got like... that little, I know. And the mom's got the little bell later on and just like dinging. She's ringing the little bell.
Where have you been?
And it's kind of, I was like, okay, I think they're trying to say something here with that he himself is sort of being treated like an animal by his own family. But again, they like touch on these things, but it never quite really amounts to like a clear indication of whether that's what they intended or not.
Going into these very like interesting thematic places, like he's really the animal.
Who's the real animal here? Yeah.
Yeah. And then doesn't she see like the tail of Ben or something? She's like, what do you have in your pocket there? And he's like, nothing.
Yeah. Nothing.
Go back to bed, Mom. And then she's dead like the next scene.
Yeah.
Which also comes, they're like, wait, did the mouse have, or did Willard have something to do with her death? I don't know.
Oh, that would have been good.
The movie leaves a lot like unexplained.
a lot.
We don't even see her die. He just comes home and the crazy aunt like, she's dead. Like, okay.
And then one of the friends too is like a funeral home director or something, right? But then they don't even go to the funeral. It's like they literally have a funeral home director character in the movie that's friends.
And then they don't have the funeral.
But they don't even touch on it. It's like, it's interesting that she just kind of it's almost like the actress like wasn't available and they're like, all right, you die. And that's it.
So what does the director Daniel Mann bring to this movie, Jordan? So we talked about him a lot already and like how, you know, he wasn't a horror director. This is not Wes Craven getting his start here. This is someone who's been making films for, I think, about 20 years at this point. And probably, I mean, I don't know. Is this, you know, in 71, were there a lot of directors just kind of coming on board projects, like being offered things? I'm assuming, right? You would just get offered stuff and he probably got the script and was like, yeah, okay. I can do this.
I would guess maybe he was the kind of guy that just would, you know, it was just sort of a job to him. And he would, you know, like it was just more of like, you know, you get these offers come in and maybe he wasn't getting, who knows, maybe he wasn't getting much at the time. And so this silly little rat project,
he was like, I can do something with this.
He was like, I can do something with this. Or it was a chance to work with Ernest Borgnine or who knows what, you know.
It could be just that. I mean, sometimes I think it comes down to like one thing, like, oh, I wanted to work with this actor and he was on board, and so I did it.
Exactly.
He did not direct the sequel, Ben, from 72, so he had better things to do than direct the Oscar-nominated sequel.
Right.
But he does a fine job. If you look at it like outside of a horror film, he's doing a solid job on this movie. There's nothing I noted, like there's not any specific like camera moves or I mean, the two kind of horror scenes at the end are not directed extremely well. They're kind of like jumbled all over the place. They're not scary.
No.
So he's definitely out of his element there. I think his element is kind of the long scenes of quiet, of Willard sitting with the rats. And like, I mean, that's kind of his go-to. He does well with those. But I think, the pacing could be a little bit quicker. We could get a little bit more tension in the second half. There's that whole scene where he goes to that house and like, well, first he has the rat, he like unleashes the rats around his boss's like party. And that's more of a funny scene than it is a scary scene. And then he has the rats at that house, like where they're like nibbling on the, like trying to get through the door.
Yeah. Oh, that's right.
And then he takes their money.
Yeah.
And I'm like, at this point, I'm like, okay, is Jordan going to be very mad at me? Because I don't think this is a horror film.
No. I enjoyed it. I mean, yeah, that one caught me off guard because I was like, okay, so this kind of wants to be, he's more interested in the idea of if you as a person could control some other kind of animal or group of animals, what kind of things could you have them do? Oh, you could, mess up your mean boss's party. You could break into someone's house and steal something. I don't think he was that interested in the horror of it.
No. And like making them like killer mice and rats and like, like the telepathy with like Willard, like that's all kind of like glazed over. Like I feel like another director would have really like ramped that up in the first hour. Like, like he's really connected to the, like, it's just kind of like nothing really lands in terms of like the supernatural aspect to it, which makes the final scene not as powerful as I think it could have been in the hands of someone else.
Yeah. And I mean, it's like a well-made movie and there's nothing clunky about it. You don't look at it and say,
it's well shot.
Exactly. It's well shot and the
good.
Performances, nothing technical takes you out of the movie.
Yeah.
In a way that like it had a decent budget. It got good performances from the actors. But on the flip side, there's not really anything that's that memorable about it. There's not that, there's no one shot, there's no one sequence that's particularly effective. Over, that just like really stands the test of time.
Yeah, I think a movie like this, if this had just one stellar scene of terror for 2-3 minutes, I think it might be thought of more today. When we think of 70s horror films, I don't think a lot of people think of Willard. Now I know why, because it's not really a horror film until the very end. And even then, it's kind of like, it's kind of goofy more than it is scary at the end. So, but I think, going into performances, Jordan, I think what makes this movie work is the lead performance by Bruce Davison. I think is really good in this. Like he plays it serious and he gives this role his all. This is one of his early performances and he's really strong. If maybe a little too handsome, like I almost feel like he's too handsome for this guy, his only friends are the 70-year-olds, it's like this guy, I mean, this is a good looking guy. Like he would have somebody. And you can see why Sandra Locke's character is like kind of into him, like, hey, we can hang out. But I almost feel like Crispin Glover makes a little bit more sense. Like someone kind of awkward, kind of gangly, like kind of like this is not a really ugly, insecure, I mean, this is a good looking dude who's just wears his clothes kind of awkwardly. And, So I thought that was kind of interesting, to hire someone like him, but he really makes it work. And by the second half, I was really on board with kind of his plight. And before the final scene, I could kind of see it coming, even though I was still sort of surprised by how this ends.
I was definitely surprised. Yeah. Yeah, I thought so too. I didn't think there was anything really that, I mean, cheesy in terms of like that time period of what they were making, but I didn't think there was anything overboard that was like from him where you could imagine when you are an actor alone in the room and you have to do a scene with two rats, like how it could just get really corny really fast. But I thought he did a good job. You felt like he actually had these pets and he actually cared about them. And I guess especially at the core of it, that's the most important thing.
Yeah. Like when Socrates is getting killed, you really feel his pain. He's never winking at the camera like, wow, this is a stinker. Like he's really engaging with Ben and all the way through. And so I think he makes the film work more than anything else is Bruce Davison's performance.
Absolutely. And even if he didn't have some rat phobia, he's very comfortable with the rats. He has to handle them so many times. He's picking them up. He's kind of throwing them around a little bit, but not in a rough way, but just like you can tell he's really comfortable with the animals. and it makes it feel very believable because the character is very comfortable with them. There isn't any of that feeling of like, I guess, handling a movie animal and being extra careful with it or being afraid of the rat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then my other favorite performance would have to be Ernest Borgnine. I feel like I haven't seen a whole lot of his movies. I'm familiar with Marty, the one he won the Oscar for. He usually plays kind of nicer guys, I want to say, in a lot of his films that I've seen. This is kind of a little bit more of a villainous turn. And I think he does a really good job with it, especially when he's killing Socrates. I'm like, yeah, this guy needs to go.
Yeah.
Like he's not like overbearingly like cartoonish as a villain. Like he's just kind of like straddling that line. But I think he does a good job, and we're rooting for him to go by the end of this movie. Like this guy needs to be torn apart. I wanted to see the horror person in me, like wanted to see the mice and rats really go to town on him. We don't really get that, unfortunately. It's kind of more of just like, scream, I've got some mice on my back, out the window. It's like,
yeah, they don't really go, they really like ease into the ability of the rats to do some chewing damage, because like one of them lands on his arm and kind of nips him, and he looks like, his arm is bleeding, and it's like, oh, which is any of these small animal things, this is the biggest problem you run into of like, okay, how many animals really would it take to take down a human?
Yeah.
And in Willard's case, they are like, well, probably that's unlikely, but maybe they could help guide him out of a window, and then the fall would be the thing that kills him rather than the actual rats.
Yeah. That could have gone a different direction, like really had them eat him alive, the boss, but no, it's the fall that kills him.
Yeah, even the birds, I mean, Hitchcock goes in a much gorier route, even with animal to human violence than Willard did, and that was way earlier.
Yeah, which is 8 years earlier, 1963, is a much more violent horror film than Willard is.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So yeah, that takes us to the last scene of the movie, which, okay, spoiler alert, we're gonna talk about the last scene. Ready? 3, 2, 1. Willard dies at the end of this movie by the hands of all of these rats, which throughout the movie they keep multiplying. Like by the end, I mean, how many are there by the end? Like 100, 200, more than that. And he's basically trying to kill Ben and can't do it, and then he works his way up to the attic, and Ben turns on him as any rat would. And he's like, all right, time to take this guy down. And Willard does not fall out of the window or anything. He's like full on, his last shot, right, is him on his chest on the ground, and he's just covered in rodents. And the movie ends with the end credits over Ben's face,
I know,
very victorious.
And the music actually becomes very victorious and heroic, and it kind of ends on like whoa. If you, like you said, if you would have titled the movie Ben, it would almost sort of make it feel like Ben was the hero all along, because he wins in the end there. And I thought the final scene, though, I wouldn't say disturbing, but it caught me off guard a little bit, because I didn't expect him to go there. And Willard, first of all, tries to drown all of them, like in a cage. He does drown a lot of them.
He does. He like 2 big packs of them, right? He like drowns them. It's like like we see like the bubbles coming out of the water, and then they stop, and then it's like, that's a disturbing scene too.
Yeah, exactly. It's like he kind of, he's kind of committing some sins there towards the end. I mean, he drowns a number of them, tries to feed them because Ben is hungry, tries to feed them poison, and Ben doesn't like that, and then has, like you said, some telepathic sort of communication power to the other rats in the basement. But that final scene, what's the final line that Bruce Davison has? Because that kind of stuck with me. It's like, I did everything for you, Ben.
He says, I was good to you, Ben.
I was good to you, Ben. It was kind of disturbing. I thought, like, he's by the window. I was good to you, Ben. It was like, wow, like this is kind of a messed up ending, where the hero who raised this animal is pleading for his life, and the animal is now in control.
So much in control. Jordan, he gets his own sequel.
He gets his own movie, and a number of close-ups in that, apparently, of him just controlling the other rat. population.
I don't know if I'll be able to wait another year to watch the sequel. I kind of want to watch it. Like, I'm curious to see what they do with it.
Me too.
But yeah, I was kind of surprised by the end of this because so much of this movie is so tame. I thought it would end with the boss dying, and then Willard gets home, and he maybe like he kind of gets in bed with a big smile on his face, and you see the rat, Ben come up and give him a little kiss on the cheek or something. Like, I thought it would be a very kind of just safe ending. This is not. I was like, oh, we're killing Willard.
Yeah.
The movie has not really set me up for that in any way. Like, that's kind of surprising to me.
Yes. Yeah, I agree. You expect him, kill the boss and get the girl.
Instead, he like pushes the girl out. He's like, go.
Yeah.
Get out of here.
I know. And Ben gets him. And it is in that sense, I feel like it kind of fits into the 70s horror films that have those sort of shocking endings, or that were known for sort of those like dour, destroy the hero kind of finales,
which audiences are not necessarily used to, especially in 71. I would say that to expect the main character to die like this at the end of this movie probably came as a shock to audiences.
Probably. And probably was a reason for its success, I would guess, just that unexpected final, really it's the final 30 seconds, because even still I expected him to just somehow kill Ben and just escape the attic. But no, when he falls down and he's covered in the rats, I was like, wow, they're actually going full close up on the rat, and credits were like, Ben won. This is over.
I was kind of rooting for Ben at the end. Were you rooting for Willard?
No, I liked Ben. I liked it.
Go for it.
I love those. I love endings like that are just kind of ballsy.
Yeah. I think the two scenes I will remember a year from now from this movie will be the killing of Socrates, which just was kind of brutal and disturbing. And then the final scene, the death of Willard, I thought, but those are going to be the two scenes I remember a year from now.
Same. I think those are the two. And look, those are the two scenes that probably anybody going to see this movie, or certainly a modern audience that goes back to revisit Willard, those are the two scenes everyone wants, right? That's the promise of Willard, of a killer rat movie, is basically those two scenes. The rest of the stuff is just kind of filler to get to them.
Yeah, but I don't know if Daniel Mann is thinking of 95% of this movie as filler. I almost think like he's more interested in the character stuff, and then he's like, oh yeah, I gotta do this like.
I agree. Yeah.
I gotta do this like horror stuff at the very end, but I don't really care about that. I would assume that's like how he was thinking approaching this movie. It's like,
I would agree.
I gotta do that part at the end, but I'm really interested in like the character arcs and things like that.
Yeah. I think you're right.
Yeah. So my last question about the movie, which I ask of each of my guests, is kind of looking at this film through a 2021 lens. Like, we've talked about why this movie is dated and kind of feels almost like a mid-60s horror film because it's not very violent at all. But like, if they were to make this film today, Jordan, in 2021, they've already done a remake from 2003, but it's been, we're 18 years on from that. Like, if they were to make Willard in the 2020s, like, what would be different? What would they do? What would they do well? What would they not do well? What do we think?
I feel like you do have to give Daniel Mann in the original a lot of credit for realizing that ultimately some kind of a more fast-paced version of rats can easily tread into Sci-Fi Channel asylum territory, right?
Yeah.
And so
it'd be silly, yeah.
What do you do? I think it is the right thing to focus on
the character,
character, and that the rats could almost be replaced with something else, and it could almost just become a full drama. But that is the one thing, the rat element is what makes it slightly more marketable. I don't know if a Willard in 2021 would ever be a good idea, to be honest. I don't know what a modern audience, what would make me want to watch a Willard, because I don't know if I saw like full blown, like, okay, it's just, we're going to triple the rat count and it's going to be rats everywhere. And because that's kind of what Ben, it seems like it is, the sequel.
Okay.
And
rats take over the world.
Really, it's just tons of rats, just massive rat infestation in the sewers or whatever.
Ben would grow. Ben would grow to 100 feet tall.
Yeah.
Take over the city.
Maybe you could do that. Yeah. And go like really crazy with it. I don't know. I think, it'd be I don't know if you should mess with it. I
So
think Willard can stay.
If Jordan, some producer was going to pay you a lot of money, and they said, Jordan Downey, we want you to make Willard, what would you do?
I don't know. I mean, I think there's always a way. I guarantee there's something you could do. There'd be a way to revive it. I don't know what would be the initial instinct, because I haven't seen the remake to see what they did.
We'd have to watch the remake.
Yeah, it seems like they stay pretty true to the original as far as keeping a boss, as far as a guy raising rats in his basement. My mind would start to go like, just, okay, get out of the house and get away from the boss element, and just what can you do with the idea of just somebody, a loner whose only friend is an animal, and their connection becomes so strong that that animal then becomes a useful tool for maybe bad nefarious purposes. Yeah.
And it can be set anywhere, and anywhere. It could be a female lead, it could be a person of color. You could do a lot with that element and kind of give it something fresh for 2021. But yeah, I think you're right. I think you would take it outside of just the basic story of the original and do something more interesting that would be more contemporary. Yeah,
totally. Maybe you could, because rats, again, now that we're talking about this, because rats are sort of this vile, creature that nobody really likes, and they live in the underbelly of the cities. You could probably come up with some sort of a metaphor about somebody who is on that sort of level of, I don't know if it's somebody who's, some kind of a commentary on poverty or something, but like a homeless person who then takes these rats to whatever, they come from the sewer, and it's kind of like you do something like Raid, and the rats in the sewer rides to the top of the skyscraper to take out the CEO. I don't know. There's probably something you could do that would be
like a bigger budget, like a kind of a bigger movie, like a $50-60 million movie about Willard.
Well, maybe, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, but I don't know. It's always just interesting to think like how far things have gone. Like the way that the horror genre has changed over the last 50 years. I mean, if you go back and look at, not just Willard, but some of these other kind of tamer films of 70, 71, just boy, like how much the genre has changed over the last 5 decades. It's pretty extraordinary.
Yeah.
And it's one of those genres that seems to change every decade too. It's like in the 80s, they get more of the slasher films and more violence. And then the 90s, we get the meta commentary with Scream. And then the 2000s, we get a lot of the torture porn kind of films like Saw, as we said before, and like Hostel and those kind of movies. And then we got into I hated the period of all the remakes. Every movie gets a remake, including Willard.
Yep. Including Willard.
From like 2003 to 2010, it was just like every classic horror film almost got a remake. And then I feel like the last 10 years has been more kind of indie horror has kind of been, films like It Follows and The Babadook and some of these really great kind of smaller films, and kind of
elevated,
almost like fans of the genre going back to kind of that 70s ideal of like quieter, kind of creepier films. I feel like we get a lot of those, a lot of haunted, like The Conjuring, a lot of these kind of haunted house stories, and then also kind of fresh reboots like the Halloween from 2018, where we're gonna do away with all the other remakes and sequels, and we'll just make a movie that's a sequel to the original, which was kind of a unique idea. And I was like, I don't know about this, and I thought it worked pretty well. So yeah, I don't know where the genre goes from here, Jordan. I mean, you're gonna have a part of it. So I'm excited to see.
Yeah, I mean, who knows where? Yeah, it's like you said, it's probably in this. People hate the term, the elevated horror. Yeah. Where it's almost just like the drama is so well executed that then you also can plug in something, supernatural or scary. But I don't think that that's a bad thing. I mean, having in like Hereditary or like you said, Insidious, Conjuring and stuff, that there isn't that same like cheesy wink that the 80s had.
Yeah,
there's not a ton of the yeah, exactly. It's just taken more seriously, and I think that probably then you figure a natural switch will be to just get back into maybe more fun kind of stuff, not necessarily campy, but just kind of, it's like Happy Death Day, freaky, that kind of like tone. Probably will start to make a bigger splash at the box office. It's just going to ride the wave of whatever's making the most money.
Yeah, exactly. It all starts with one. when Halloween was from 2018 was a huge hit, I thought, oh, now we're gonna get Nightmare on Elm Street direct sequel from the '84. We'll get Heather Langenkamp back, and that hasn't happened yet, but we'll see what comes of it. But yeah, I mean, just summing up Willard again, not a great horror film, a solid movie. I would give it a probably 7 out of 10. It's a fun watch. It's 90 minutes. It's short. It's not going to take up too much of your time. Really strong performance by Bruce Davison, and not a whole lot of great horror set pieces by any means, but if you're just in the mood for a really good kind of a character drama with a strong ensemble cast, including Elsa Lanchester and Ernest Borgnine and Sandra Locke, I mean, it's kind of an interesting film. If you've never seen it before, it might be worth a look.
I agree. It sounds like maybe we were talking more about the negatives, but overall, I definitely
I liked it.
I enjoyed it. I liked it. I would recommend it. I would give a little caution to anyone that I recommended it to, of just like, hey, just don't go in expecting, rat action and
yeah, it's not a kill a minute kind of horror movie.
Right, exactly. And it like you said, don't even really expect much of a horror film, but you can see, bits and pieces of why that movie has stuck around, or has been kind of, stuck as I don't know if you'd regard it as a classic, but a lot of people know about Willard. It's in pop culture to a degree.
Yeah, there's not a whole lot of like horror films about killer rats and mice, right? I mean, this is one of the very few. I mean, do you know of another one outside of the two Willard movies and Ben, the sequel?
Yeah, here's a great one I watched recently. It's hard to say horror again. Okay. Peter Weller's in it. It's called Of Unknown Origin.
Okay.
It's really, I actually like this one over Willard, but it's very similar in terms of a guy alone in his house, but it's much more about Peter Weller is not friends with a rat. Peter Weller plays a guy who I think he works at an office, and there's a rat in his house, and it's driving him crazy, and he can't catch it. And to the point where then his wife goes out of town and he starts just ransacking and tearing his house apart to get to this rat. So it's Peter Weller versus a mouse.
What decade is this movie?
Is this I think this 80s? Is 80s.
80s. Okay.
I think this is pre Robocop. So this is early 80s, I believe. But it's a lot of fun. Of Unknown Origin.
Where'd you find that one? I haven't heard of that.
I forget where, on just some random list or something. Just every now and then I kind of go back and find something that is a little bit more obscure. It's directed by, I believe, George Cosmatos, the director of Mandy's dad, who he did Tombstone and some other movies. And I think this was an early film of his.
That's the great thing about horror films, right? Is that you can always discover new ones, right? Classic films, movies made in the last 5 years. There's always films that I discover much later that I love. I'm like, oh my gosh, I never heard of this. And it's all, horror films are my favorite. It's my favorite genre, right? Because when they're great, I mean, there's nothing better. When they're really, really bad, they're usually entertaining. So there's very, very few just boring horror films. Usually it's one or the other, right? It's really great and fun and scary. And then when they're really poorly made, they can be a lot of fun too. So outside of a comedy, if a comedy is not funny, it's a terrible, terrible 90 minutes of your life. You're just sitting there like, why am I watching this? But horror films, good or bad, are usually fun.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. And Willard was another fun one. Not as much of a horror film as a lot of the other titles we talked about. But worth your time. Check it out.
Yeah.
All right, so that takes us, Jordan, to our final two segments. The first one is called the Divine Double Feature. That's where we take a contemporary film of like the last 20-ish years that you think would make a really good double feature with 1971's Willard. What title did you go with there? What would be a good kind of modern film?
This is kind of funny because it's maybe a little on the nose, a little obvious, but Mouse Hunt, because
the kids movie.
Yeah, the kids movie
with Nathan Lane.
The Gore Verbinski movie with Nathan Lane. Yeah,
I've never seen that. I love
that movie. It's really good. You should
watch
it.
Okay.
I mean, yes, it's labeled as a kids movie, but it's actually a little darker than you would expect. It doesn't look as sort of like joyous as the cover and everything makes it makes it out to be. It's a lot of fun. It's got it's really well made. There's some great production value, great sets, and just like destruction of the house. It's really cool. It's got a lot of style. You watch that movie and you can say, this is a filmmaker who's going to go and make bigger movies. There's bits of that fantasy that Pirates of the Caribbean has in it. So Mouse Hunt, again, because of the mouse, but also just because tonally, it's kind of like where Willard sort of lives in the first half. Mouse Hunt is kind of in that realm, except then Mouse Hunt doesn't go into a horror direction where Willard does. But I think it'd be fun to see them both back to back.
Yeah, that was like, I want to say like an early DreamWorks release that came out, I think Christmas of '97. That was like the first
Sounds about right.
That was the first season of Christmas or of DreamWorks movies started that fall with like Steven Spielberg's company with like Amistad and Mouse Hunt was like their like children's film of the season. And I was like 13 when that came out. So I was like too cool for Mouse Hunt. I'm not going to see Mouse Hunt. I'm going to go see Amistad. Yeah.
Right.
Great times. Oh my God. So yeah, no, I'll take a look. I haven't thought about that movie in a long time. It's a great recommendation for this. So I also went with a non-horror film. I was thinking of like, what's like a really good kind of character study about a social kind of outcast that I've really liked the last 20 years. And the one I picked was 1 Hour Photo, starring Robin Williams. He works at that photo lab and he becomes obsessed with the family, and he makes copies of their photos and like plasters them around his apartment. He lives alone. You know, there's that wide shot of him just like walking into his apartment and just very quietly pouring a glass of water and then sipping the water and just kind of staring forward. Like the only thing I have in my life is my job and this family who he like bumps into right at like the mall. And it kind of teeters on horror in the last 20 minutes, but it never quite goes there. It's Mark Romanek directed it, the really famous music video director. He also did Never Let Me Go, that really good 2010 film with Carey Mulligan. It's not a film, I feel like it's not a really go-to film for when people are thinking of Robin Williams, because he's obviously thought of as a comedian and Mrs. Doubtfire and all of his classic comedies. But my favorites, I mean, maybe outside of Good Will Hunting, of course he's great in that, but one of his 2 or 3 best dramatic performances in a film, I think, is 1 Hour Photo from 2002, which was that crazy year where he did 2 other dramatic performances. One was Death to Smoochie, where he played the villain with Edward Norton. And then he also did Insomnia by Christopher Nolan, where he played the bad guy. And, Al Pacino is in that and kind of trying to track him down. So it was like a weird year where he played 3 villains. An actor who was really, for most of his career, was the hero in funny, kind of family-friendly comedies and things like that. 2002 was the year he branched out and did something different. And I think the best of those 3 is 1 Hour Photo. I think that would be kind of an interesting, more modern film to watch right after Willard, to look a film made about 31 years later, to see another movie about a social outcast and kind of how cinema had changed over those 3 decades. Might be kind of an interesting project.
I like that. I think that's great. Great movie choice too.
Yeah, really good. Like really, like it surprises you. It goes places you don't expect.
He did another. Did you ever see The Final Cut? Was around that time too, which was another great little darker Robin Williams thriller.
He did that. He did a 2000. That was 2004. He did a film in 2006 called The Night Listener. That was also a dark drama. Like he did more darker films than people remember. I think The Final Cut kind of came and went, but that was the one where his job wasn't he like going into the minds of people who had just died, and he would cut like a montage of like for the funeral, right? The funeral to play his edited video of like the memories of the person. And he goes into one and like they're killing somebody. Isn't that the premise?
He goes, he's like an editor for your funeral video, more or less. And then while he's doing a project, he sees something that he shouldn't have seen and gets caught up into a thriller. But I just his little run there, like you said, he's got some good little hidden gems that people don't talk about that often.
Another great one, which I gave 4 stars to, I remember just like being knocked out by it, was called World's Greatest Dad which came out.
I remember that.
Which came out in 2010, a very dark black comedy, like where he's like a wannabe writer, and then his son hangs himself. He like kills himself, and then he takes like his son's writings and like kind of profits off them. It's like a really dark movie, but really, really well done.
It's super weird.
Bobcat Goldthwait directed it. Seek that one out too. I really enjoyed that one. So our final segment's called Beyond the Flick. That's where we look at like an actor or director or genre from the movie. I thought, since we're both huge horror movie fans, I thought we would just talk about animal horror films, natural horror films, which there was a list on Wikipedia. There was a lot of films, many titles, Jordan, I had never heard of. So I'm gonna have to do my homework here. But yeah, if you had to pick your favorites of this genre of like, animals, also, insects, like anything that's like alive, including like plants could also count, like anything that's like a living thing, that kind of a horror film. What are your favorites in that kind of subgenre of horror movies?
I mean, I would say it's probably impossible to argue that anything is better than Jaws as far as the best natural horror, animal horror. That's the ultimate. But and I love Jaws. But the stuff the ones that I watched the most, that I've probably seen the most, Lake Placid. I love Lake Placid.
Lake Placid's fun.
It's so much fun. Oliver Platt. I rewatched it actually just pretty recently.
Yeah, it's got a great cast. It's Bridget Fonda and Bill Pullman and Betty White, right?
Yeah. The cast is great. It's just like one of those big budget studio creature features, which you don't get very often. And the crocodile effects look great. Lake Placid's a ton of fun. Deep Blue Sea, of course, a lot of fun.
Yep. Samuel L. Jackson has a great final scene in Deep Blue Sea.
Yep. Anaconda, I remember seeing that in theaters as a kid. A lot of fun with John Voight and everything with the snake at the end.
John Voight's wink.
The wink.
His wink at the end is classic.
The wink. I loved these things growing up. I'd rented this one that was called King Cobra or Cobra that the Kyoto brothers did the special effects for the Cobra, and they made the critters, and they did all kinds of other puppet and special effects work. But I remember that one, and I rented all of these things, any of the animal stuff before it all became the Sci-Fi Channel Asylum stuff. That's just like, just kind of that unwatchable Croctopus versus whatever the hell you want to come up with.
I can't say I watched those, Jordan. I
no.
There's so much to see now. It's hard to keep up with some of these like lower tiers horror films.
Yeah. Trying to think if there was anything else those are the ones that stood out to me. The Ruins, you did mention Plant Horror. The Ruins is great.
That's on my runners up, is The Ruins. Great movie, great novel by Scott Smith too.
Those are the ones that popped out, and there's so many obscure ones. Frogs. That I remember seeing.
That's a 70s. I think that's a 70s film.
I think
right?
so.
Frogs?
I think so. That one's just ridiculous.
Probably
it's like the frogs
probably
are
made.
On the
probably made after Willard's success would be Frogs.
I'm
right?
sure. I'm sure.
How about we do one about frogs? What do we call it? Frogs.
Frogs. Yeah.
What a terrifying title. Honey, the new horror film is playing. Frogs.
Yep. Frogs.
That's what they should have called Magnolia.
All right. Piranha. Piranha's a ton of fun. How can you forget Piranha? The new one. I mean, the old one is got some good moments, the Joe Dante one, but the new one's just so much fun.
Yeah,
the remake.
The new Piranha, what my memory of that is, I saw it with my younger brother Justin, and at some point in that movie, it was so insanely gruesome that he finally just stood up and left. And he was gone for a while. I think he came back for the end or something, but I said, "Where'd you go?" He was like, "I couldn't take it anymore."
Wow.
It made him feel so sick. That part where that woman is just like ripped into two.
Yeah.
Like she just fall. So yeah, that was my memory. And isn't Richard Dreyfuss at the beginning of that?
Yeah, he's in the opening, kind of playing, supposedly sort of playing a little Jaws nod,
Yeah, so that one was fun. So yeah, I put on my runners up, I put Anaconda. I thought the most recent title was Crawl. Did you see Crawl from 2019?
Crawl's great.
That was great.
Ton of fun. Yeah.
That was, that was a movie I wasn't quite expecting much, and I was actually really thrilled with that one. Of course, Cujo from the Stephen King
Oh
novel.
yeah, that was on my Cujo. Yes.
Cujo is the last 30 minutes of that movie is just nonstop tension. Dee Wallace, one of her best performances, if not the best. I mean, she's trying to protect her child in that little car. I actually I had her do a shout out to my mom for her birthday.
Oh, nice.
On that, like where you can like pay $20 and get them to say like happy birthday. So I actually got to like have Dee Wallace say something nice to my mom and then say, oh, and thank you for letting your son watch horror films. Means a lot.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, I had that Dee Wallace experience this year. And yeah, it's just a really great, I mean, when you think of Stephen King, you don't necessarily think of like animal horror films, but Cujo is one of the more famous, I think. And, I think if that film had been made 10 years earlier or 10 years later, I don't think it would be as effective. It was made in 1983. I just think it was a really good time for horror films. And it was like the boom of Stephen King. And it's just like, it's pretty subtle, and the dog looks just right. It's not like overdone, but you're scared of that dog. And when it's like getting up on Dee Wallace and pushing her down, like, and just going at her, like, and her son's crying in the back, it's just a really solid horror film, I think.
Yeah, I agree.
This is probably not a great movie, Jordan. And I haven't seen it since, but I've always had a thing with bees. I've never liked bees. And there's really not a great horror film about like killer bees that I have seen, but there was one when I was like 10, 11 years old called Deadly Invasion, the Killer Bee Nightmare, that gave me nightmares for months.
Wow.
And I never knew the title until I looked up this Wikipedia list of all of the different insects and animals, and it said bees, and it said Deadly Invasion, the Killer Bee Nightmare, 1995. And I was like, oh, Robert Hayes. I was like, yep, that was it. I could never remember who was in it or what it was called, and there it was.
Wow.
So that movie freaked me out when I was a kid, because I was always been kind of freaked out by bees. Frozen, not the Disney movie. Frozen from 2010, the ski lift where what are they, like coyotes or wolves, like are basically waiting for them to drop. I loved that movie. That movie kind of came and went. I don't know if a lot of people talk about it today, especially confusing since the Disney movie is so popular. It's like hard to the other Frozen. Open Water, the shark movie, which I got to see before it came out. It doesn't hold up very well today because it's shot on like early digital cameras, so it looks really terrible, like just from a like the look of the movie. It's kind of like that 28 Days Later kind of thing where it's shot like really kind of grungy, like cheap digital cameras, but still a really solid kind of thriller. And then of course The Ruins, as you said, and then Snakes on a Plane is fun.
Oh yeah, of course. Snakes on a Plane.
I have not watched it since the opening night, but that opening night in a crowded theater was a lot of fun. So my top three, Jordan, number 3, I would go with Arachnophobia from 1990. Have you seen Arachnophobia, about spiders?
That's another great one. I watched that a number of times
Speaking of nightmares, that if the Killer Bee one didn't do me in, Arachnophobia, I saw that probably 7, 8, 9 years old, and that really, because that was PG-13. That wasn't R. And so I got to see it early when I was very young, and it freaked me the hell out. Like if you're freaked out by spiders, that's like the gold standard of like scary horror film. Jeff Daniels and John Goodman,
great Terminator, so much fun.
Really good building of tension. And then I'm trying to, it's been a long time, but isn't like at the end there's like this gigantic spider right at the end with Jeff
Daniels. Like a big puppet that they it's in the basement fight sequence with and down in the basement, and big crawling. It almost looks like a face hugger out of Aliens or something, like the way it crawls around.
And I just remember like an early scene of like just this like old woman. She's just like walks over to turn off the light or something. And then there's just like this huge spider, and she screams, and the light goes. I mean, there's just little touches in that movie that were so well done. Who directed Arachnophobia? I'm trying to remember. I should have looked that up beforehand.
That's actually a really good question.
Was it Frank Marshall, the producing partner of like Kathleen Kennedy and Spielberg?
My gut was gonna say
I think
somebody that was closely related to Spielberg. Because it was I don't think it was Ron Howard.
It was a Spielberg. It was a Spielberg production. I think if I had to, if I had to bet $100, I think it was Frank Marshall, who mostly produced films, but he directed a couple or more than a couple. I think Arachnophobia was Frank Marshall.
I feel like you're going to be right. Let me see here. We're 2 seconds away from getting the answer.
Who I believe also directed Congo from 95.
Yeah.
Is that right?
You're right. Frank Marshall.
Frank Marshall did it. All right.
Yep. Congo.
Like, my brain was like, wait, who directed Arachnophobia? And I'm kind of I'm running through the names. I'm like, no, wasn't them. Frank Marshall. Yeah, Frank Good Marshall. On you, Frank.
Yeah, Arachnophobia is great. That's a classic.
So that's a great one. Number 2, of course, would be The Birds by Alfred Hitchcock. The
Birds. Yeah.
Which, it doesn't hold up as well as some of his other films because the special effects are very dated, right? So I did a Hitchcock class for a group of students about 3 years ago, and they loved Rear Window. They loved Psycho. The Birds, they were taking a nap in the back. They didn't like The Birds as much. I kind of see that. I see why. And it's the story isn't as great as it is in like Rear Window. But I still think I love the idea of just telling a story about this meet cute, this guy and this girl, and they're kind of flirting, and she's going to go do this nice thing for him in Bodega Bay. And you're really for 30 minutes watching this love story play out. That's what the movie is. And then this outside force all of a sudden slowly takes over the movie. So by the last half hour, it's a survival film, and it's not anything what we've been promised from Hitchcock in the opening half hour. That's what I think makes Psycho really strong too. Like you're promised one movie about Janet Leigh for 40 minutes, and then it's not about her. It's about Norman Bates. I love when you don't see that. I feel like you don't see that a whole lot even these days, where you think the movie is about something and then it's about something else. I love when films do that, and he did it really well in both Psycho and The Birds, and I still like the bird attack scenes in The Birds. I think they're still really good, even if they look a little dated, like the kids running on the when you see
school stuff is
the school stuff, but like her sitting and smoking, and you see the crows like landing behind her. That is a great scene.
Great.
And the way he keeps cutting to her close up, and then it cuts to her, and she sees a crow. And then the camera follows the crow for like 5 seconds. And then when it lands, there's like hundreds of them. And she stands up. Her eyes are big. That is just classic, superb filmmaking. Probably his last great movie, although I really love Frenzy from 1972, which I'll get to on the podcast in about a year, which I'm really excited about. His one and only R-rated movie, which has like nudity and violence and blood and things he could not show in film for the last 50 years of his career. Right at the end, before he retired, he got to make an R-rated movie, Frenzy. But really, like the last great film he did was The Birds from '63. And then, of course, as you said at the beginning, the top one is Jaws. I mean, Jaws is just such a landmark classic film. Do you think of Jaws as a horror film, Jordan? I usually don't think of it as a horror film.
I mean, I don't. It's one of those movies that you have to like kind of debate, I suppose, in your head. It is, but I don't think of it that. When someone says, name your favorite horror film, even if Jaws was it, I wouldn't come out of my mouth that quickly. But it is the stuff where the shark eats Quint on the boat is so terrifying.
Talk about
so
terrifying
disturbing.
To this day.
Oh, that sequence is that's the thing that's crazy about like Jaws, is that it has not aged at all. Like I don't watch it and feel like, this just doesn't really
70s,
get me anymore or whatever. It is so effective still.
Yeah.
And that kill scene, and there's this one shot that like the camera becomes handheld and kind of starts like sort of flowing with Quint as he's being yanked, and it's just like
and it's
screaming, so disturbing. His scream,
and he could have played that kind of tongue in cheek, winking at he is playing that for real, Robert Shaw.
Yeah,
I am getting devoured by a shark. like you buy it, and the way it's cut together. And, you see just enough of the shark that you really buy that it's there on the boat eating him. I mean, that last little spurt of blood that comes out of his mouth. I mean, I've told the story once before. I watched it for the first time at a friend's birthday party when I was like 9 or 10. And it was so intense, I had to leave the room and go watch like a kid's movie with my friend's sister. I couldn't take it. It was too much.
Yeah.
Rated PG, Jordan. PG.
Crazy.
That and Poltergeist are rated PG, and I'll never understand.
That's right. That was before what was the first movie that got the PG-13 that sent them into that?
I always forget what the first movie was, but it was 1984. I want to say
it was something more obscure. I thought
it wasn't like a big movie. Yeah.
Right.
Well, 84 we get Gremlins and Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, and both of those two films were flirting with the R. And I think, it might have been Steven Spielberg on Temple of Doom that really gave the final push to PG-13. Like we need an in-between rating because it was just getting too hard. I mean, Poltergeist is a PG-13 movie. Jaws is definitely PG-13.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
So it's hard. Like when we think of the PG rating today, like we think of like kids films. So the idea of like, with your 6-7-year-old niece or nephew, hey, let's watch the PG rated Jaws. Not a good idea.
I don't know why they can't just change it. Like just change the ratings now, like based on what today's standards are. You would think what's the big deal? Yeah.
Like, I don't know when they rated The Birds and Psycho, but they later rated those, right? So those two films came out before 68. So they didn't have ratings, which was not rated. But if you look today, I even think it's like on IMDb, The Birds is rated PG-13 and Psycho is rated R, which is really strange to me.
Really?
Why would Psycho be rated R? I mean, she's naked in the shower, but you don't see anything.
Black and white. Yeah, that's ridiculous.
Psycho should be PG-13. Like, that's weird. But yeah, Jaws, such a great movie. I watch it every few years, and it just gets. I feel like it just gets better every time I watch it. I appreciate the performances and the dialogue and the tension, the way it just kind of slowly gets bigger and bigger, and by the time they're on the boat, you're just all in. And it's kind of like this great adventure film on one hand. It's also this kind of terrifying horror film on the other hand. And, him blowing the shark to bits at the end is still so satisfying. That's great.
A movie's great when the stuff that maybe hooked you in the beginning, the Jaws or the shark stuff or the Quint death that we're talking about, are what you want to kind of give it a second watch for. But then as time goes on, I now look forward to like the schoolhouse scene where you first introduce Quint and him talking about what the shark is in town, or I look forward to all of the other scenes that aren't the obvious ones.
Yeah, exactly.
Because you realize how good those things are, but you miss them the first or second time that you watch a movie like that. But Jaws has got to be number one. I don't know how.
It's got to be number one. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know how you. Well, Jaws is number 6 on my list.
No,
it's the best of these. You've probably watched it. If it's been a while, go back and check out Jaws again. So good. And I can't wait to talk about that one on the podcast. Not as far out as you might think. I feel like that's going to be like an 8-hour episode, but we'll see. When we talk about Jaws, there's a lot to talk about with Jaws. All right. So that takes us to the end here, Jordan. Thank you so much for being here. And, this marathon chat about Willard and the horror genre. This has been so much fun. It's been a long time since we've just talked, and it's been a thrill. So I'd love for you to tell our listeners, like, where can they find you online? And, if you have anything to promote, if you want to talk about the Headhunter one more time, how they can find that to watch, anything you want to say.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me first and foremost. And it was great to talk about this and just talk about a movie that is totally random and something that I hadn't experienced yet. Headhunter, you can find it on, if you have, like you said, if you have Shudder, you can find it on there. If you are a horror fan, Shudder is definitely a must recommend. But other than that, you can get it anywhere else. It's probably still in Redbox. You can rent it on Amazon, iTunes, any of those other things. Other projects coming out, nothing's been announced yet. Just been working on a lot of stuff this past year, but you can follow along. Yeah, exactly. And quarantine, I mean, what you get a lot of writing done. Yeah, as you probably know.
I wrote a novel in the last year because there's a lot of downtime.
Exactly. But anything that comes up, I'll post on my social media. You can find me at Jordan Downey, and Instagram, Twitter, whatnot. Just excited to see what's next, just as much as anybody else might be. I am as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would love to have you come back, Jordan. There's a lot of great horror films to come here. When we get to Texas Chainsaw, I might have to give you a ring. That would be a really fun conversation. Talk about Texas Chainsaw coming up here. Yeah.
That would be a lot of fun. That was 1974, right?
1974. Yeah. So we're a few years out, but
yep.
You're first on the list, Jordan. That would be a thrill.
Awesome.
So thank you for being here, Jordan. Thanks to all of you for listening to Film at 50. You can find us online at filmat50.com. All the socials, we're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You can email us with any questions you might have about anything at all at 50yearsagoinfilm@gmail.com. Also check out the Patreon page where we have at least 2 new bonus episodes a month exclusive to our subscribers. So check that out and support the podcast. Until next time, remember, 50 never looked this good.